Hey y'all, Katie here with MOMnation, and welcome to another episode of Our Love Story. We know being in a relationship is hard, so Dyanna Isel, certified couples counselor, and I talk through different tips and tricks to help you navigate your relationship and get through everyday life. While you're here on your favorite podcast platform, please subscribe to our channel. Or if you'd like to visit us on YouTube and watch the video, our handle is MOMnation USA. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hey, MOMnation, it's Katie, and we are back again with this monthly episode of Q&A with a couples counselor, which we call Our Love Story with Dyanna Isel. Welcome, Dyanna.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, we love having you on the show. It's always nice to have an expert to talk through these things with.
So much fun. I love doing this with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Before we get too deep into the show, guys, I just want to bring up our show sponsor. And her name is, it's actually very fitting for today's discussion. Her name is Ms. Cox Sandoval, and she is a divorce attorney, or a family law attorney, I should say. And it actually happens to go somewhat hand in hand with what we're talking about. So it's quite appropriate that she is the sponsor of our show. So if you are in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and you are dealing with any familial legal issues, Ms. Cox Sandoval is the one to see. So check her out at coxsandoval.com. All right, back to you, Dyanna. So what we like to do, if you've been following us for a little while, is we like to talk about real life stuff here on this show, and specifically stuff that our group members from MOMnation are going through. And so we see a lot of posts come up on the feed. You actually would be surprised how many posts are in the group. It's a lot. But a lot of them are about family issues, relationships, custody stuff, things like that. And so here on this show, obviously we focus on the relationship. So whether that be the marriage or the union of two that create that romantic relationship really is what we're talking about. So today we're going to, let me just share my screen here really quick. We're going to talk about this post. Can you all see that all right? For those of you that are on and just listening to this audio version, so if you're on our podcast, listening to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform, you will definitely want to subscribe to us, follow us, download the episodes, and we just changed that podcast channel name. So if you're a little confused, it's no longer MOMnation. It is actually MOMnation Talk Radio. So look that up on your favorite podcast platform if you are the podcast type, or of course, if you are listening to us in the audio version right now, please do us a favor and subscribe. We are over on YouTube at MOMnation USA if you are more of the video version, and you can check out our playlist there, Q&A with a couples counselor, Our Love Story. So I will read this for those that might be on audio. It is somebody that has posted in our group anonymously, and she says she's going through a separation and a slash divorce. Gaslighting is totally a thing that is happening. 11 years is a long time with a lot of history and 2 kids. It's hard to not be lonely and devastated when you didn't see this coming. Is divorce counseling a thing or a waste of time? Any tips for being strong and just ending it as quickly as possible? Or do you explore all options and drag it out? So what say you, Dyanna?
Well, there's a lot of questions here. There's a lot of context to this one post. So the first thing I'll address is, like, divorce counseling a thing? Well, that's kind of a difficult question to answer with just one answer, right? Because divorce counseling is assuming that you are needing some sort of like mediator or some sort of mediation, like where you've already made the conscious effort that you guys are going to be separating. So that's one thing. If you choose to do that, you can do something that we call, I like to do a healing separation agreement, where basically we just go through everything, your side, we break everything down from like finances to kids to like all those things until the divorce is final, just to help ease with that transition. However, if you are using couples counseling pre-divorce or pre-separation with the hopes that it's going to like save the relationship, that becomes very difficult sometimes. A lot of times people will use couples counseling as like a last ditch effort to try to improve their relationship. And research shows that couples wait an average of 6 to 7 years after they've started having problems in their relationship to seek couples counseling. And by then, there's a lot of things going on, right? There's a lot of unresolved conflicts. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of things happening there that have to be sort of teased out and untied and things like that. So the long answer to this is, if you're using it to have an amicable, healthy separation, yes, you can certainly do that. But you both must be on the same page as to what this is trying to accomplish. If one of you wants couples counseling and the other one doesn't, forcing them to go is probably not going to turn out the way that you are hoping, because they're not going to be open to the experience. If you are both open to trying to repair the relationship and make it work, absolutely head into couples counseling. If your partner does not want to do the couples counseling, I still 100% always encourage people, go seek your individual counseling just to help you through this adjustment, to give you the additional support that you're going to need through this process. Totally agree. You have more to say. Sorry. No, you're good. That was like the first part of the question. And what do you do to get that additional support? Well, individual counseling. And also sometimes there's other ways of going about this separation, but I think that might be one of your next questions, Katie. So I will hold off on going too deeply into that. But basically, couples counseling, you guys both got to be on the same page, or you're not going to get out of it what you're needing to get out of it.
Right. And like, how often do you see things go down that road, go to the divorce road, the separation road, and it's so toxic and they're at each other's throats, and it just seems to me like that there's no need for that, really. I mean, I understand that there's emotions involved and I understand that there's unresolved issues, but does it really need to be like that? Do we need to be vindictive? Do we need to, get back at the other one? I really feel like we don't. I mean, honestly, our goal is to separate and to be happy, right? So is causing more chaos and injecting more toxicity into that situation the way to go? And how often do you see that?
Well, that's what I call like an unwillingness to change, right? Someone who's not willing to take any accountability for what their role is and the conflicts that led them there. So if you do have that sort of activity or that toxicity that you're describing, where there's a lot of vindictiveness and like criticism, contempt, like those types of things, that doesn't show the ability or the willingness at this point to want to dig deep and be curious as to what you can do to change the relationship. You can't force somebody to want to do something. You can't force somebody to want to change or to change the dynamics of their relationship. Do I see that? I do. I do see it where one partner is really digging deep and really trying hard to make this work, and the other partner has sort of already checked out. So if there is, only 50-50 and the other person is not giving anything, there's really no continuing, or there's really no point in continuing to pursue couples counseling if it's really just delaying the inevitable separation.
Right. I heard this term the other day that I never heard before, and I thought it was a pretty cool term, and I don't know if you've ever heard it before or if it's something that you use, but it's conscious uncoupling. Mm-hmm. Have you heard that? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So, conscious uncoupling, I think, really came to the forefront of our society when Gwyneth Paltrow used it when she was separating from her husband years ago. They said that they were, committing to a conscious uncoupling. So essentially what that means is that two people in a couple have decided that it's best to separate. That's going to be best for both of them. So it's going to be the best for their spirit, their overall well-being, their health. It's going to be best for them to continue their lives in the best way, separate, but they're committed to being, friends as much as you possibly can in that capacity, and being really healthy and effective co-parents. So you are turning your energy towards, how can we make this as positive experience as possible? I want the best for me, but I also want the best for you. So that's sort of what encompasses conscious uncoupling, is that we're doing this separation together. We've both mutually decided on it, and we're going about it in a way that feels the healthiest for not only us, but for any of the kids involved as well.
And what does that look like? Give me some examples.
So one of the ways that people can do a conscious uncoupling is what we call bird nesting or nesting. So that essentially means that the family home stays intact and the kids stay there. And then the parents get another place to live, like they'll have an apartment or a condo or something like that, that the parents will share in order to, save financially, instead of having like 3 places to live ultimately. So if the family home is here, and then we also have the parents' apartment or condo, the parents will just rotate in and out of that condo and family home rather than the kids. So the kids never have to leave their family home, and they get to spend time with both parents in that home one at a time. So that is one way to help maintain some of the structure and some of the normalcy, especially for the kids. There's a little bit less adjustment there. And there's opportunity for the co-parents to work together in the apartment, condo, other house situation that they have. They work together to sort of maintain that is the additional home. Does that work for everybody? No. Some people want to have their own living situations. They, sell the house, they split it, and they go into their two separate houses. There's nothing wrong with that, because in some situations, that's just the way that it has to be to make sure that everyone is healthy and happy as possible. But when we're referring to conscious uncoupling, that is one of the options, is called nesting.
And how long does that typically last? I mean, that doesn't last forever.
For some people, it can last in the interim for maybe up to a year. For some people, it's even longer. It just depends on how long that living situation works for them and how their individual families start to grow. So when you're separated and you pursue a new relationship, that living arrangement might not work well for you anymore now that you have a partner. You maybe want to have like a house to yourself, or maybe the custody arrangements change. Maybe somebody needs to move. There's all kinds of things that can obviously change that. But some people do it for years, especially if they have kids in school, young kids in school. They want to see this through. They want to see them, go through the rest of school or whatever. I think it really just depends on the situation.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and of course depends on the comfort level of the individuals that are involved, because what then happens when mom or dad meets somebody else?
Exactly. So if they start to grow their own individual family again and get into another relationship, they're probably not going to find that arrangement works for them. But when they are consciously uncoupling, that is something that each partner will be supportive of, and make whatever changes are necessary. Again, this conscious uncoupling is about being as healthy for each other as possible, like looking out for the other person's best interest, and not being, vindictive or trying to get back at somebody, or it's all done in such a way where both partners agree this is what's best for us. So let's find solutions on how to keep our kids healthy and how to keep our relationship intact, because divorced or not, that's still the mother or the father of your kids. So you're going to be in a relationship with them in some capacity, for the foreseeable future.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And it's, to me, the most important thing would be the kids, and to see that the kids are adjusting. And maybe I like what you said about it's not a big adjustment, right? But we can make little adjustments to get to our goal to eventually, be dissolved at that point. What other things, so that's household, physical living arrangement. What other things, like in terms of finances, in terms of custody arrangements, things like that, how else can we sort of make small adjustments to consciously get to that goal, but in a softer, more friendly way? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, instead of being mean to each other,
more amicable way, right? Yeah. So expectations and boundaries are really important. We've talked about those before in different facets of a relationship, but setting forward what you think your expectations should be. This is what I want it to look like, sort of thing. And then also setting the boundaries for like, okay, so, communication is going to look like this, or it's going to be, on the weekends, or whatever the situation may be. But boundaries and expectations are really important, especially if those partners, after they're separated, get into new relationships. Those other partners might be like, what's going on here? Like, are you divorced, or are you guys friends, or like, what's happening here? So setting forth what your expectations are is really, really important. And that can be applied to your finances. How do we decide who's paying for what? Are you paying for the after school activities? I'm paying for the sports. You're paying for this, and I'm paying for that. And just taking everything and dividing it in a way that you think would be the healthiest, or you think it would be the best for you. There's also, the court option. Obviously, they're going to tell you how to split things down, like down to the dollar. With conscious uncoupling, people like to get ahead of that so that it's not a forced legal judgment. They've already come to some of those agreements themselves. And that does help make some of the adjustments easier when you're setting those boundaries and you're putting forth those expectations for what you want this to look like.
So it's realistic to say, or maybe realistic isn't the right word, but it's appropriate to say, hey, this is ideally how I see things panning out. Household, finances, maybe you own a business together or something, you know what I mean? So there's lots of things to unravel there. This is how I see it playing out. This is my ideal situation. What's yours?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you never know. Some of it may line up.
Absolutely. But you won't know unless you communicate it. And if you don't communicate it, and you have an expectation that's unspoken, that person doesn't meet your expectation later, you really have to look in the mirror and say, did I make that expectation very clear? Did I make that boundary very clear before I'm getting upset with somebody else's actions? Because if they have no idea, how can you hold them accountable to that? But yes, It is totally reasonable to put it out there. This is kind of what I see it looking like. What do you see it looking like? Let's see how we can compromise on things in the middle. And again, you've struck a good compromise when both people feel like they lost a little bit. So being able to be open and curious enough to say like, okay, I can bend a little bit on this. Can you bend a little bit on that? Ultimately for, the best situation for everyone and the comfort and adjustment for the kids.
And so do you suggest that the couple get together and make that plan, write that all out, figure it all out before telling the kids?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being as prepared as possible before telling the kids, I think, is the best way to go. Now, the kids don't have to have all those details. They don't need to know the nitty-gritty of all the things that are happening. But when both partners feel like they are on the same page and they're prepared with any questions that they might get, that presents a united front to the kids, which is really, really important. Additionally, what's important with that is not only do you see, the kids see their parents as a united front, even if they're not going to be together anymore. That has to continue. With conscious uncoupling, there's always going to be some sort of some consideration, some care for the other partner. And that's so incredibly important. So incredibly important. Future partners might think, oh, why are you sending your ex-wife a birthday card? Well, I'm also being a really good example for my kids. Yeah. Just because we are not together anymore, that me and their mom or dad didn't work out anymore, doesn't mean that I don't still care about them and the person they are in my life. This is how you treat people. This is how you treat people with respect and with consideration. And you are teaching your kids so much more by taking that route than the alternative. You are teaching them that even after separation, it is possible to still love and care for another person. And it teaches them how to value their parents individually in the face of conflict.
I think that is so giant for kids because, coming from divorced parents myself, there's a lot of like kid guilt that you don't even know why you place on yourself, but you do. And when they're at each other's throats, like mine were, it's easy as a young child when you're not really, you're not very experienced, in the ways of the world, and you don't really know things. I think it's easy to take that upon your shoulders. Do you see that at all?
100%. Yep. Kids tend to internalize and blame themselves for whatever reason they have for when their parents get divorced or separated. They have thoughts such as maybe if I, hadn't broken that lamp 3 years ago, or maybe if I had listened better, or maybe if I hadn't done this, or maybe if my grades were better, or maybe if I was nicer to my sister, or all types of things. They'll blame themselves for just being too much of a kid, and that just caused conflict and caused them to fight because it stressed them out. That's most often what kids internalize when their parents get divorced or separated, is that it somehow comes back to them.
And so once you get the plan together and you kind of know, okay, this is a thing, we're definitely moving forward with this is how it's going to go. What is the best way, and I'm sure it's probably different for depending on who you are, but what's the best way to present that? How do you start that conversation with your kids?
Well, kids see everything and they hear everything. They might apply a different context to it than we do as adults, but it is rarely a surprise unless the kids are very, very, very young. And that's an entirely different conversation because there really isn't a whole heck of a lot of conversation. It's more of adjustment. But depending on the age, there's age appropriate ways to go about it. But kids can sense when there's been some conflict or some tension, things like that. For some kids, it's almost like a relief when their parents do come and talk to them because they know that there's something going on. But age appropriate wise, between the ages of, I'd say, about 7 up to really up through teenage years is, your mom, your dad, and I, we've come to a decision that we feel like for us all to be the happiest, the healthiest people that we can, and to be there to be the most supportive for you and our family, is that we've decided at this point it is best that we separate. So I want to be here to answer your questions, but I just want to go over a couple of things first, and then we can spend some time with some questions. So what does that mean? That means that while we both love you very, very much, we've gotten to a point we don't feel like this is healthy for us anymore. We still care about each other. We still want the best for each other, but there are going to be some changes. And let me lay those out for you. Let me show you what that's going to look like. And then after a few minutes, give the kind of the open Q&A, right? For the kids to ask the questions they're going to ask. They're going to ask things like, well, who's going to pick me up from school? And, what about my birthday? And, things like that. So being prepared for those types of questions is really important going into it, but it's also not a terrible thing to not have the answer to those things. And I think being honest about that is the most important thing. So the kids ask you a question that you guys hadn't talked about. It's okay to say, you know what, that is a fantastic question. I don't think we really thought about that. So can we get back to you on that? We're going to talk about it and then we'll get back to you on it. You know what I mean? Because it's important that kids know that adults don't have all the answers all the time. Right. It's a healthy expectation that not everybody has all the answers to all the things.
So that's 7 and up, which makes a lot of sense to me. What about 7 and below?
So it's kind of a different conversation. It's going to be more about like what the adjustments are going to be. Daddy's going to be picking you up from school, or, daddy's going to be, have you over the weekend, next weekend, and he's going to be staying somewhere else for a little while. You're talking more just like about the motions, more about the adjustments that are happening rather than, we're separating and, let me answer your questions. We're not really going to have many of those questions. 4 and 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds are going to have more of the questions like, am I going to see them again? Are you going to be there for my birthday? Who's going to take me to school? Who's going to come to my soccer? Those types of things. Those are questions that you'll find between like 4 and 7-ish. But overall, they're not going to have a whole lot of questions until time goes on. As that adjustment moves forward, you might find a whole bunch of questions coming your way 2-3 months down the line when things have already been set in motion and, custody arrangements have already made and all those things. That's when you start to get a little bit more questions. It's really important, though, to be on the same page with you and your ex about how to handle those questions, because you want to make sure you guys are both aligned on whatever the answer is and that nobody ever feels like they're in a position to have to throw someone else under the bus, because that is the antithesis of conscious uncoupling. How can we show as much care and consideration for each other in the light of we're just not great together anymore, right? But I still care for you. So any of those questions that might come up, if you don't have the answer, as I said before, it's totally okay to say that. Touch base with your ex and like, hey, this is the question that I got, or this is the statement that was made. Where are we at on this? So that you're both, again, that united front, which is so important to the kids' adjustment.
Absolutely. So what have you seen? And, granted, I understand that it's a little bit different if there's, some domestic violence happening or there's stuff going on. I understand it's a little bit different, but let's just pretend it's not. And both parents are healthy and it's a conscious uncoupling scenario. What have you seen has been the most successful custody arrangement or kid sharing arrangement?
That is so subjective because of work schedules, right? Like there's some people that work graveyard shifts. There's some people that work your typical 9 to 5. There's some people that work swing shifts. There's some parents that have 2 jobs. There's so much to consider. But usually what I see a lot of is like the 5-2-2-5, 5 days, and then 2 days, and 2 more days, then 5 days. Then you swap the weekends like that. And then swapping holidays too. But again, like it's just so subjective for everyone's schedules and what's going to be the best for the kids. And again, this is where spite does not exist in this conscious uncoupling scenario, right? It's like, I understand that you get off work at 4 o'clock. I get off work at, 8 o'clock. So it makes sense that, Monday through Friday, you would have the kids at night to put them to bed, and then I'll pick them up here. And you're just looking for ways that make it work the best for you and for your schedule with the other person in mind. So there's really no cut and dry for how that's going to work. I think the toughest part for separating parents is talking about holidays.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's talk about holidays.
Yeah. So that is the tough stuff, right? Because we have such strong emotional connections to holidays and how we spend them with our kids. We have traditions. We have things that we do every year. And some of those things have to be, changed a little bit. And they're definitely going to look a little bit different than they did in years past. So sure, in the perfect ideal scenario, like let's spend holidays together, even with both exes together. Yeah, that sounds great. And that might work. Until one of the partners gets into another relationship, and that might not work for that, that extra partner anymore. So generally what I see most common is rotating every other holiday. So this year, if I have them for Christmas, next year, you're going to have them for Christmas, so on and so forth. Just sort of trading off those big holidays. That's usually what I see the most of. But again, there's definitely room for interpretation and room for flexibility there.
Have you seen it work where the parents actually do spend holidays together?
I have seen it work. I have seen it work for a couple of years. And then one of the partners, will go into another relationship and they recognize like this isn't going to work exactly like this anymore. Because then that other partner has their own family that they want to visit as well. And if they're in the child's life, then inevitably the extended family will be part of that child's life too. So there is some adjustment, some pivoting to be done when one of the partners gets into a relationship, but it can absolutely work where they can come together for holidays and spend that holiday together. Or even if it's not on that holiday specifically, the day before, day after, something like that, where they can see that like, this is what healthy looks like. We can be consciously separated because we know that we are better off. We're both healthier and happier not being together, but that doesn't mean that you can't see what a healthy family looks like, and that we can come together and we can be peaceful and respectful for the sake of you guys and for the sake of our own peace, right? Yeah. And for the sake of our own well-being, our own mental health, we can come together and celebrate these things so that when you grow up, you look back on these things and think like, my parents didn't really work out together as a couple, but they always made sure they showed up.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I assume, obviously I get what you're saying about holidays and about, other partners coming into the mix and other families and gatherings and things like that. But what about like birthdays and inevitably weddings later on in life and sports games and things like that? Do you see it working with parents being in the same room together? See, mine never could be. So I'm like, wow, this is a crazy concept to me. But, you see that work? Totally.
Absolutely. I see it all the time. 2 parents are on the field, they're divorced or separated, but they're both there for their kids. They're both there at the recitals. They're both there for all the things. Like it's totally, totally possible. Again, if you are having a really tough, big issues in the relationship and you're waiting until 6, 7, 10 years down the line when things are really nasty and there's a lot of resentment that's built up, it's going to be really hard to course correct and be like, you know what, this is going to be best for us to just, let's do this conscious uncoupling thing. That's really, really, really difficult when there's already just so much built up by that point. So that's why it's so important to be really open and communicative as you go through your relationship, as you grow, as you change as a person in some ways. Like, it's really important to be communicative about what your needs are and if they're not getting met, so that you can get to that place. If ultimately it's not going to work in the long run, you've had so much respect and communication for each other the whole way, conscious uncoupling becomes so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, coming from divorced parents, my parents divorced when I was 2, and it was horrific. I just feel in my gut that it's so much, I mean, obviously, so much better for the kids to see their parents getting along, working things out, figuring out their differences, coming to a happy medium. Like, that is such great life lesson, right?
Absolutely.
And you got a front row seat, not wishing it on any kids out there, but still, like, what a great life lesson to learn. Your parents are, is this the right, I don't want to be offensive, but they're grown up enough basically to be able to do this.
Yeah.
Definitely more of a positive impact on the kids, I'm sure. The second part of this post, and I'll share it again just so that you can see it. Hold on just a second. The second part of this post that I saw in there, and maybe there's more that you can pull out of it, was this group member that posted anonymously seems to have been blindsided by this. You see that a lot?
I wouldn't say a lot. I would say yes and no. I think just as often as people know, like, this is sort of going in that direction, there's also times where there's, infidelity, and someone has decided that, like, that's my non-negotiable. Like, there's no going back after that. If that's your hard line, if that's your boundary, then yeah, you are going to feel very blindsided. But I'm also seeing in that post that gaslighting is totally a thing. Yeah. So I would be curious, as, the couples counselor, like, how do you see that show up? And if it's truly a gaslighting behavior, then that's someone that has assumed that they are the problem, or that they have been misinterpreting things, or their memory is flawed, or their experiences are flawed. So they've already kind of assumed that they are the problem in their relationship, and the other person has just decided that they're done. Mm-hmm. So I would be very curious about, like, gaslighting type behavior and how that's interpreted. That would tell me a lot more about whether or not that anonymous person felt like blindsided or not.
Mm-hmm. So what if you are, though? I mean, is that even possible, or is that kind of a red flag? Like, hey, you're probably not really paying much attention here.
A little bit of both. Sometimes we get conditioned to the types of conflicts that we have in our relationship, and we just accept them as a part of our relationship. So then when separation does come, it does feel like kind of a surprise. Like, oh yeah, I know we have our issues, we have our differences, but I didn't think it would come to this sort of thing. But rarely, I would say more rarely, is it like a total surprise type situation. Even if there is some infidelity, there's sometimes some indicators that, like, something's going on, something doesn't feel right. Rarely did that just, like, come, like, right out of the blue when there's just no conflict or anything. Not saying that it doesn't ever happen, because it totally does. But for people that feel blindsided by it, once you start digging in a little bit, sometimes we can identify some things that are like, oh, yeah, I do recall that, or I remember feeling that way, or that type of behavior was different, or I did notice some changes. He was, staying out later, or things like that. You know what I mean? There's usually some indicators there. So I would say it's less common that someone is just completely blindsided by a separation.
And again, communicate, right? Communicate in your relationship. If you're feeling something, or if you are, noticing little changes, ask, because then you may not be so blindsided. I don't know. That's kind of my thought.
That's also looking for a way to connect, right? So even if you're just doing that to avoid being blindsided by a separation, I'm doing my part. I'm noticing something is different. I'm communicating that it feels different. I'm trying to uncover what's happening here. That's just good communication, right? It's holding your partner accountable, or being purely curious. If you're seeing a change in their behavior, like what's going on? Is there something bothering you, or, something like that? So that good communication has to exist always.
Do you ever suggest to any of your patients like to plan that, or to say, hey, once a week, do a temperature check? Is that a thing, or is it just
Totally
different for everybody?
Totally, like a State of the Union conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a good opportunity for people to share like their gratitude throughout like the week or 2 weeks, however frequently that you do it. Because a lot of those things get missed. Like we all have to adult. We all have to empty the dishwasher.
We all have tasks. Exactly.
We all have the things, but a little bit of gratitude goes a really long way. So during these State of the Union conversations, that's where we can share our gratitude or share things that we wish had gone better throughout the week. This is not a time to hold on to something you feel really salty about and let it fester for 6 days and then come out guns blazing, whatever your grievance is. That is not the time for that. But if you are in an emotionally regulated place, that is a time to bring up like, hey, so when this happens, I didn't feel that great about it. And I've spent some time thinking about it. I want to find out what your perspective was or what you meant by that, or whatever the case may be. This is not a time to like, again, let things fester and then start a big fight. It's just the time to let things kind of come to the surface. Again, gratitude. I know that you cooked dinner 5 nights this week. I really appreciate that. It really makes my life easier when I come home from work or whatever the case may be. But also talking about, did you see the progress report that came home in our kid's backpack? Or did you get that email from the teacher? Like those sorts of things that are not like 911 that have to be handled right away. That's a great way to touch base with your partner, is just having those conversations at least once a week. I feel like would be really helpful.
Like a staff meeting.
Yeah.
In my staff meetings, it's what are our wins for this week?
Yeah.
What didn't work that we could improve upon?
Yeah.
How are we feeling about everything that's going on, kind of thing. So it sounds almost like a business arrangement. And I don't want to like bring a coldness to it, but right? Like kind of like a business arrangement. I mean, really.
Tell me what's good. Tell me what wasn't so great this week.
Yeah.
First questions to my clients is like, tell me what went really well, or tell me what you're really proud of from this week. Oh, we had this conflict and I was really proud of the way we got through it. It didn't blow up. We didn't start yelling at each other. And, sometimes it's like, it's been a tough week. I can't really think of a win. Okay, well, tell me something that didn't suck. I'll take that too. Sometimes some weeks just be like that. What I mean? So looking for those positive things first retrains our brain to look for the positive. We always go for the negative first. You see the negative restaurant reviews, you see all of those things. People are very vocal about that, right? So in our relationships, we're not always as vocal about the things that are going really well or the things that we're really grateful for. Sometimes our brain goes straight for like, I didn't like that thing that you said or that you did. So kind of turning that around, starting with these are the things that went really well. And then now these are the things that we had some opportunity on, or things that I wasn't like super stoked about over the week. So that's really important too.
Well, and I think, a lot of times when we jump to the negative like that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's like muscle memory. Like that was something that we learned way a long time ago. Maybe our parents acted like that, teachers, caregivers, whomever was, prominent in our life when we were developing our personality and developing our natural responses to things. And so conscious uncoupling is really showing your kids a different way, is setting kind of growing their muscle in a different direction if we're going, jumping to the positive versus the negative all the time. I feel like in my upbringing in society itself, I was born in the late 70s, it was just all negative. And even just now, entering into my late 30s and 40s now I'm starting, and maybe it's just a perception thing, but now I'm starting to notice, hey, no, there's a totally different, there's a totally better way. And if we're focused more on the positive, then magic, more positivity tends to happen. Of course, it's all based on focus, right? But I feel like it starts with childhood. These muscle memory things, right?
Absolutely. Setting that positive intention is really important. I think it's also, there is something to be said for, it's very cliche. It's very common to hear like positive vibes only. That's not realistic though.
Right.
So not only positive vibes, if we do positive vibes only, we're basically teaching and encouraging not only, our partner, but also our kids that your unpleasant negative feelings are not welcome here. And they're also very inconvenient. So don't do that. So you can only have like a happy face on. And when we grow up with that, we grow up to have very people-pleasing type behaviors and very anxious behaviors, because we have learned that only the happy stuff is acceptable. And all of my sad, mad, scared, lonely, negative feelings are not welcome, because positive vibes only. You know what I mean? So there's something to be said for, let the crappy vibes in too, as long as we just visit and we don't live there. You can stay there, but you can't stay. You can visit there, but you can't stay there.
Right.
You know what I mean? Visit, leave, just like the passing emotions, just let them on through. But don't attempt to block them out, because it's not always positive vibes only, and that's totally cool.
Well, and then if you didn't have, some of the negative stuff, or let yourself feel those feels, then how would you even know what the other side is like,
Perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you
important.
your relationships as well. Your grass is greener where you water it, right?
Right.
So are you going to spend that extra time investing in the relationship and how to improve it? Or are you going to invest that time and turn that energy outward? Only you can make that decision. But I think it's important to consider, if you do go into couples counseling, like, where do I want my energy to go? Is my energy into justifying why this relationship is just not going to work, and this is just where we've landed? This is our prerequisite before separating. Or is my energy going to be spent into watering this side and making this grass greener? Because I know it can be, it has before, we can get there again. So it's critical to know what your intention is if you decide to go to couples counseling.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Anything about, and I assume you're a fan of conscious uncoupling.
I am.
Anything more about that you would like to add?
It's you've heard me say it a bunch of times before in some of the other podcasts, but man, boundaries.
Yeah. The B word.
Those are so important. Boundaries and expectations when you are deciding to go through with this conscious uncoupling. And also, you just got to dig really deep and look at how you're accountable and what you can do to be a positive change in this separation process. And any thought that you have that are critical or contemptuous, really challenge that. Like, where is that coming from? Is this an emotional reaction because of what's happening? Or do I have any facts to back this up? Where is this narrative coming from? And really digging super deep and challenging that, and not just acting on things very reactively. When we act on things from an emotional reactive place, very rarely do we get the things accomplished in the way that we want to. So being really, really, really clear on your boundaries, and being mindful about your thought process, and being mindful about how you react versus how you respond. The name of the game is to be respectful and to be considerate. And this is all for the health and the mental health and the happiness of everyone involved here. So if we're looking for anything other than how to make those things happen, you're not going to consciously uncouple.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. So if you are in the Phoenix area, I'm pretty sure Dyanna's taking on new couples, right, Dyanna?
I am.
Awesome. And how do we reach you?
So you can go to my website. It's DyannaIselTherapy.com. In the upper right-hand corner, you can schedule a free 15-minute consultation. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram at Dyanna Isel Therapy, LLC.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for being with us and for sharing your expertise. It's always awesome talking to you. And I know our audience appreciates it a bunch, because so many people are dealing with these issues.
Well, thank you for having me. I love being here.
You are so welcome. And then you out there, you've heard me say it once, you'll hear me say it again. If you are the video version type person, hop on over to YouTube. Our YouTube channel is at MOMnation USA. You can check out our playlist, and most importantly, you can connect and subscribe to Dyanna and I's playlist, which is Q&A with a couples counselor, our love story. If you are listening on your favorite podcast platform, we are MOMnation Talk Radio, and we have a few other shows besides this one that are pretty awesome too. So hang here, subscribe to us, and we'll see you next time. All right, Dyanna, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.